What is going on, guys? It is Marcus and Nistro from Well Play Games, and we're going to talk about the new Vernalizer from Power of the
Eternal Coat?
I think so.
Or you just call it Pog. Just call it Pog Champ.
I've not seen this archetype. I know Nistro has, and I'm pretty sure that he has more interesting things to say about it. We're going to start with the Vernalizer Fairy of Hills and Blooms, level 4 Earth Fairy. The stats are kind of okay for level 4. But I think the effect is what really matters most, and that matters for all of these. You can only use the first effect of this card's name once per turn. You can discard this card and one other monster or Vernalizer Fairy card, add one Vernalizer Fairy card from your deck to your hand, except itself, then you can special one Earth monster from your graveyard, but you can activate monster effects rest of this turn except for Earth monsters. And then the continuous effect of Vernalizer Fairies cannot be destroyed by card effects.
What you're going to see in these Vernalizer monsters is that they all discard themselves and any other monster from hand, or any other Vernalizer Spells and Traps, and then they all do different things, and then at the end of their effect, they summon an Earth monster from the graveyard. If you play a deck that's all Earth, like Earth Machine, or if you're messing around with something that's like Heroics or something like that, you might want to pay attention to.
On to the next one, which is Vernalizer Fairy of Forest and Awakening. These names are kind of obnoxiously long.
Well, these are just English translations. We don't know their actual TCG names yet.
Fair enough. They all have the same cost now that I'm seeing them. Discard this card and one other monster. Send from your deck to the graveyard one Earth monster that can be normal summoned or set. Then you special one Earth monster from a different name from your graveyard, but you can activate monster effects just turning some Earth monsters.
The same way that Rocket Tracer locks you into Dark, this is going to lock you into Earth. And if you're playing something like Earth Machine, you really don't care. This one mills one from deck to grave. Even though you can't summon the one that you milled, you can activate the effect of it, so that's actually pretty cool.
It's all just interesting to think about because, as Nisha's mentioned, you can use this specifically and one other one that I think is coming up soon. You can use both of these in Earth Machine, and they have a lot more interesting synergy depending on the plays that you make and the monsters that you're running.
Especially with all the new Therion stuff that's going to come out. By the time this comes out, Therions will have already been settled into the format, and everyone knows the boss monster's going to pretty much make Earth Machine. Like, this on top of all that crazy extra shit, it's just going to be insane. Because now we actually have way more lines and way more variety of builds we can go into.
The next one is Vernalizer Fairy of Flowers and Fields. I've noticed that all these stats are kind of abysmal.
Yeah, they're kind of mid. I wish its defense was 600 instead of its attack, but yeah, you can discard this card and one other monster or Vernalizer Fairy card, add an Earth monster from your graveyard to your hand, not to your deck. I'm sorry, guys. Except Vernalizer Fairy of Flowers and Fields. Then you can special summon one Earth monster from your grave, and then you cannot activate monster effects for the rest of the turn except for Earth monsters. And its second effect, your opponent cannot target Vernalizer Fairy monsters you control with card effects. I wish it said cards, but yeah.
So if you have this and a Fairy of Hills and Blooms, you sort of create like a whole little Magic Spectre field, which is a nice little interaction.
If you have like two of them in your hand, Vernalizer Fairies and Forest of Awakening, because that one mills from deck to grave, and then this one adds from graveyard to hand. So even though you're not summoning that second one from the grave, you can add back another one from grave to hand, the one that you just milled. So essentially, if you have two of them, you can add from deck to hand.
The last monster in this lineup, the Vernalizer Fairy of Mountains and Melting Snow. Personally, I think this is the best one. Its stats are reasonably well compared to its level and attribute. You can discard this card and one other monster or Vernalizer Fairy card, draw one, then you special summon one Earth monster from your grave.
Cool thing about this card is that you actually get to draw. So a lot of them, they just like interact with a monster in the graveyard or they add you something, where this one is like, okay, you get to draw a random card from your deck, which means you get to see potential board breakers or negates or hand traps on top of whatever you're already doing, and you get the monster back from the graveyard. It's not terrible. I mean, I think it could actually be pretty viable, especially since it can discard any other monster. It doesn't have to be
Vernalizer Fairy card.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a Vernalizer Fairy. So that's sort of like the benefit of playing all these guys, is that you're going to have way more utility and a lot more potential as to what you can do with your deck. Because in the regular Earth Machine combo, where you're ending with Anger Knuckle and Bullet Train either in grave or on field, if you don't have the second level 10, drawing those extra cards because you've already went like 10 cards into your deck is just going to be insane. That like increases the probability that you're going to get something that makes you win the game against your opponent. It might just be like what you fucking need.
Onto their spell card. The Flower Crown of the Vernalizer Fairy, it's a continuous spell. I would probably have assumed it was a field spell, judging by its effect.
No, it'll be too good if it was a field spell, but it has the first one we saw, it searches it anyway, so.
Earth monsters you control are treated as Vernalizer Fairy monsters, which is a very interesting little question there of like what that can cause.
since they're treated, they get the secondary continuous effects that all of them have.
I know the targeting protection, the destruction protection.
So like even Fairy of Force and Awakening, which this card is just double as good now. It's like you can target a Vernalizer Fairy monster you control, and its attack becomes doubled until the end of the turn. Like, and that's his current attack, not original attack. Like, it's current attack.
Yeah, so that's pretty good.
Yeah, you use that on a Machina Citadel or something, or like one of your trains, and that's like insane. Like, brings it up to 8,000. Potentially attack.
Or a Leeb.
Second effect, which is like the one that I think is going to make this deck probably insane, is that once per turn, if a Vernalizer Fairy in your hand would discard itself and one other card to activate its effect, you can make it only discard itself, which means you don't have to go -2 to go plus. So like with the bear over here, he has to discard himself and one other to make you draw a card, where now it's like it's just a 1-for-1, and you get the one back from the graveyard as
so
well.
Technically it's a +1.
In a way, yeah. But you'd have to go -2 to search this. Yeah. Well, -1 to search it, so it sort of evens out.
First trap card, Calendar Rotation of the Vernalizer Fairy. Targets one in the grave, now that adds it to hand or specials it. So it's a nice little like recursion tool. During your opponent's turn, if you have no cards in your hand except during the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your grave, special summon as many Vernalizer Fairy monsters with different names as possible from your grave, or return them to the hand during the end phase.
Well, it's a normal trap, so the adding back isn't going to be every turn, it's just going to be once. The second effect can't be used the same turn it was sent to the graveyard, so I think most people are probably going to skip over this card, but the fact that you can banish it from grave and then special summon as many as possible from grave, I think you can probably play it as like a one-of, because you can drop it with your Vernalizer Fairy effects and then set it up for next turn. And the second effect is only during your opponent's turn, so you might not even have to worry about setting it. You just send it from hand to grave straight, and then opponent's turn, wait till their end phase, and then you summon out 5 different monsters from your
The way that I see this is that they sort of interact the same way that the Melffy monsters do, in a way.
No, because Melffy's react to what your opponent does.
I don't know, I'm talking about the in-hand effects to summon.
Oh, okay.
Like,
well,
you could sort of work something out there.
Okay, like Melffy Cat, I think it is. It's like when you're during your end phase, you can summon it, and then when your opponent summons a monster, you can add it back to your hand, and then add a beast monster from deck to hand, something like that. So it's very possible you can mix Melffys with this, because you're going to get your monsters back to your hand, and then set up for next turn.
Their last trap card, Vernalizer Fairy and Flower Buds. It's very interesting. Target face-up cards your opponent controls up to the number of your Earth monsters special from the grave with different names. Return Earth monsters you control with a hand equal to the number of targets, and if you do, return those targets to the hand.
Let me just break this down. I just need to understand everything that goes on here. Okay, so you target cards your opponent controls, and they have to be face-up equals the number of Earth monsters that were special summoned from the graveyard with different names. So that's already like a word salad right there. So it has to be monsters summoned from the grave, and you have to target face-up cards, all right? And then you return Earth monsters you control to the hand equal to the number of targets. Now you can return any Earth monster, so I guess that's sort of like workaround with this card, but otherwise it's really not that crazy, because you have to return your monsters to the hand and then you return targets.
So you can't even return extra deck monsters, because I have to return the monsters you control to the hand. Overall, looking at this archetype so far, I can already tell it's going to have a punk level of introduction into the TCG. The monsters are really good, and they have a lot of splashability. The spells and traps, not so much.
Yeah, the spells and traps, like I can see because I can potentially see like the spell card being used the most, because now you don't have to go -2, and you get the extra benefits of like not being able to be targeted, or you can make second attacks, or you can't be destroyed by card effect. You might as well play one of it, since the first monster can search it anyway. The Fairies of Hills and Blooms can search it. There may be in the build, maybe in the future, builds where it's focused Vernalizer Fairy Machina or Vernalizer Fairy Infinitrack, where it's like you're focusing, instead of playing the entire Earth engine, you're focusing on one engine, and then playing this secondary Vernalizer engine to like supplement what you can already do. I think Machina, it'll be better, because Unclasped Bear can mill any Machina monster, and you're locked into summoning machines for the rest of the turn, but you can still search your Vernalizer monsters, and you can still search this card, because your Vernalizer monsters don't have to summon themselves, so they play around your lock with the Brutal Dozer or the Unclasped Bear. So I think it works. Like this just looks like machine support to me. Like that's what I'm seeing here.
blue.